April the 12th, 1944, northern France. 17,000 feet above a land we only knew by the red lines drawn on our mission maps. I was 23. But that morning, inside that B-17, I felt every year of my life pushing down on my chest like the weight of the sky itself. The oxygen mask itched against my face. The rubber had cracked from the cold, and every breath sounded like a dying bellows. I could feel the engines humming through the floor, 4 of them rumbling like old gods holding up the wings by will alone. The air was thin, and so were our nerves. We were halfway through the mission, and I remember thinking how quiet it was up there. Too quiet. I looked to my left and saw Turner, the waist gunner. He was chewing on a stick of gum like it was the only thing keeping him from coming apart. Across the intercom, someone cracked a joke about being late for breakfast back at base. Laughter, thin, hollow. The kind of laugh men force when they're trying not to look death in the eyes. I reached out and tapped the side of the fuselage. A habit, superstition, maybe even prayer. That aluminum skin had saved us more than once. We called her Louise, after a girl someone loved back home. Every rivet, every plate, every dent told a story. Some stories ended better than others. Then I felt it, a vibration, faint, like a whisper beneath the metal. It wasn't the engines. I knew that sound. This was different. It was like the plane itself had taken a breath. I didn't say anything, not yet. I waited, listened, and then I heard it again. A groan, long, low, like metal twisting under pressure. Like the hull was trying to speak. And that's when I knew. Something was wrong. Deeply, terribly wrong. I leaned into the intercom. "Pilot, this is ball turret. You hear that?" Silence. Then static. Then the captain's voice, calm but clipped. "Roger. Maintain position." Maintain position. Like it was that simple. Like fear didn't crawl up your spine when the aircraft you were trusting with your life started making sounds you couldn't explain. I looked down through the plexiglass dome beneath me. Fields, rivers, little towns that looked so peaceful from up here. You'd never guess that the earth below had been soaked in blood, that boys not much older than me were buried in those fields, names carved into white stone, some never found. The sky around us was calm. The sun reflected off the silver bodies of our formation. Bombers stretched wingtip to wingtip like a flock of migrating birds. 40 aircraft, maybe 50, all heading east. All believing, maybe foolishly, that they'd be the ones to make it back. But up there, belief was all we had. I checked my gun mount. Double 50s, freshly cleaned, fully loaded. They weren't just tools, they were lifelines. You didn't babysit them because of orders. You did it because they might be the only thing standing between you and the next man's name being written down as missing in action. Then came the smell. Burnt oil, not much, just a wisp, but enough to set every alarm off in my head. I tapped the turret frame again, this time harder. My knuckles met cold steel. I could almost hear the reply. Another groan, louder this time. I closed my eyes and listened, not to the engines, not to the crew chatter, but to the plane. She was tired. We all were. 17 missions. That's how many she'd flown. Too many, some said. But the war didn't care how tired we were. It cared about targets, about tonnage dropped, about results. They told us the Germans were on their heels. That victory was coming. But I'd seen what coming looked like. It looked like empty bunks in the barracks, like letters that never arrived, like jackets folded on cots that no one had the courage to touch. I adjusted my harness and shifted my weight. The cold had settled into my bones, fingers numb, toes stiff, the kind of cold that feels permanent. You didn't sweat in a B-17, you froze, even when your heart raced like it was trying to outrun the bullets that hadn't been fired yet. Time moved differently up there. Minutes felt like hours. Every sound meant something. Every silence meant more. And that silence broke when the left wing dipped. Just a twitch, barely noticeable, but I noticed. The intercom came alive again. This time, no jokes. No forced laughter, just voices, clipped and sharp. "Check hydraulics. Engine 2's running hot. Anyone else smell oil?" We were 50 miles from the drop zone, and Louise was starting to crack. If you've felt this story, if it caught your breath even for a second, leave a comment and let us know what it made you remember or imagine. Every memory matters. And if you believe more people should hear what these skies saw, subscribe to the channel. There's more history to tell and more voices to honor. The first shot didn't sound like a gun. It was more like a hammer against sheet metal, sharp and hollow. A sudden slap that rang through the fuselage and made every man flinch, even those too seasoned to admit it. It came from somewhere behind us, maybe the port side. No warning, no time to prepare. 1 second we were cruising in formation under the morning sun. The next, we were inside a machine being hunted. I remember how fast everything changed. One moment we were in calm, cold silence. The next, the intercom erupted. Bandits! 3 o'clock low. I count 6, no, 7. Shit, they're climbing fast. My heart kicked like it had been shocked back to life. I pressed my eyes to the gun sight, scanning the edge of the horizon. That's when I saw them. Little black specks at first, growing fast, too fast. Then the sun caught the wings, and the nightmare became real. Focke-Wulf 190s. They were smaller than us, faster, meaner. Built for one thing, tearing through bombers like us until we spilled out the sky in fire and metal. They climbed into formation with terrifying precision. They weren't attacking yet. They were watching, calculating. It was psychological warfare before a single round was fired. We called them vultures for a reason. They had been waiting for us, hidden in the clouds, maybe guided by radar, maybe tipped off by ground spotters. However they found us, they came with confidence. They always did. The Luftwaffe had trained these boys well, veterans from the Eastern Front, some of them, cold-blooded, disciplined, and merciless. I gritted my teeth. My fingers found the trigger grip. The twin 50s in the belly turret pointed downward like a pair of clenched fists, and yet I felt powerless. That was the cruel irony of our position. A belly gunner could see death coming, sometimes even before the pilots could, but seeing it didn't mean stopping it. The first pass was fast, too fast to react. The lead Focke-Wulf came in from below, from the blind angle between our bomber and the one behind. I caught a blur of gray and black, then the sparkle of tracer fire cutting across our formation, like burning ropes. A second later, a thunderous impact tore through the nose of the plane ahead of us. Glass exploded. Something heavy fell through the frame. I don't know what or who it was. That's when the shouting began. Tail gunner down. He's hit bad. Jesus Christ, they're under us. Someone's leaking fuel. The radio cracked with overlapping screams. Voices breaking, not the kind of panic you hear in movies. This was real. This was survival cracking open the surface of discipline and training. I swung the turret and opened fire. The sky lit up. Streams of lead arced through the air. I wasn't aiming at anything in particular. I was just painting the sky with bullets. I hoped to hit something. I prayed to make them hesitate. It worked for one of them. A fighter banked hard, avoiding the line of fire, and rolled beneath us. Another didn't flinch. He came straight through the hailstorm, guns blazing, his engine roaring like some kind of possessed machine. I could see the pilot's face for a moment. Calm, focused, almost bored. He wasn't aiming at me. He was aiming at the bomb bay. The rounds hit just forward of the wing root. I felt the plane shudder. Not shake, shudder, like it had flinched, like it had taken a punch to the ribs and lost its breath. Left engine smoking. Ball turret. What do you see? I swallowed. My mouth was dry. I was seeing too much. Our formation was breaking. Tight, disciplined lines had become a jagged mess. Bombers were banking away from each other, trying to dodge what they couldn't outrun. One was on fire. Another was dropping altitude, trailing smoke and pieces of its own skin. And the fighters weren't letting up. They circled like sharks, diving in 2s and 3s, picking targets, hitting hard, then disappearing into the blue, only to return from a different angle. I tried to track one as it looped under us, my guns following in a shaky arc. But the turret couldn't turn fast enough. The hydraulics were too slow. I squeezed the trigger anyway. The barrel spat flame. Shell casings bounced off the dome like hail. My hands vibrated with every burst, but I kept firing. Then, a hit. I saw a puff of smoke burst from the wing of a 190. It jerked sideways, spun once, then steadied. Not going down. Not today. But it was hurt. That was enough to make me feel like I could breathe again, until I heard another sound. It was a scream, not from the intercom, from inside the plane. Turner had been hit. He was leaning against the fuselage, hand pressed to his shoulder, blood leaking through his flight jacket. His eyes locked on mine through the narrow access tunnel. No words, just the kind of look you don't forget. He wasn't asking for help. He was just letting me know. I nodded, then returned to the guns, because that was the deal we had up there. We would look at each other, say nothing, and keep firing until we couldn't. I don't remember how long the attack lasted. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. It felt like hours. Time stopped meaning anything when you were under fire. You only measured it in engine noises and ammunition belts, in screams and explosions, in how long you could hold your breath without realizing it. When the fighters finally pulled back, the damage was done. 4 bombers were gone. Vapor, debris, fireballs with wings. 2 others were trailing smoke, limping westward, engines coughing their last breath. And us, we were still flying, battered, shaken, but flying. Inside, no one spoke for a while, not because there was nothing to say, but because we were all counting the holes in the fuselage, checking our limbs, listening for the next round of engines climbing through the clouds, and knowing this would not be the last attack. If this piece of the story hit you, tell us in the comments what part stuck with you. These aren't just old tales, they're pieces of lives, frozen in time. And if you believe stories like this should be remembered, subscribe and help us keep them alive, one mission at a time. It started low, almost like a breath, a deep guttural groan that rippled through the metal skin of the aircraft, not the familiar vibration of engines or the staccato of flak bursts. This sound had weight. It felt alive. And it didn't come from outside. It came from within. The fuselage moaned again, louder this time. I could feel it through my boots. A pressure, a flexing tension that seemed to echo off the bones in my legs. It was the kind of sound that didn't just get heard, it got felt. The kind of sound that makes your stomach knot before your brain even catches up. I knew that sound. It was metal pushed too far. It was stress tearing at the seams. It was a warning. The B-17 was groaning like it had grown tired of war. I pressed my hand to the side of the turret, fingers spread. The vibration was steady now, rhythmic, a heartbeat out of sync. Something was coming loose, something deep inside the structure. You fly enough missions, you learn to tell the difference between normal wear and the sound of something about to fail. This was the latter. Over the intercom, someone yelled that the left wing was dipping slightly, that we were losing altitude, that the rudder was sluggish, that the hydraulics were acting strange. All the technical language in the world couldn't cover what we all knew in our gut. Louise was breaking apart, and she was taking us with her. I shouted into the mic, more out of instinct than protocol. "The skin's pulling. She's flexing too hard." There was no reply, just the clatter of loose ammo belts, the creaking of the structure under strain, and the sound of wind finding its way through new cracks in the body of the plane. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Planes don't explode all at once. They die slowly. A shiver in the airframe, a cable that snaps under pressure, a panel that peels away from the wing root. Every groan from the fuselage was another step closer to the final silence. I rotated in the turret, watching the top of the aircraft. One of the dorsal plates near the radio operator's position was flapping, not much, just a few inches. But at this altitude and speed, a few inches could become fatal. Turner was still bleeding from the shoulder, but he was conscious. He looked at me with this dazed, hollow expression. The kind men wear when they've realized their lives are no longer in their own hands. No panic, no words, just acceptance. That frightened me more than the fighters. The wind roared louder through the openings, a howling whistle that rose and fell like some kind of animal caught inside the walls. The plane was speaking, screaming maybe, and we were strapped into its ribs, hoping the bones held just a few minutes more. I remember the ball turret shaking suddenly, jarring my spine. I looked down. One of the bomb bay doors was rattling loose. We hadn't even reached the drop zone yet. The vibrations were prying everything apart. "Secure the doors," someone called. Too late. The left door slammed open for a second, exposing the belly of the plane to the 200-mile-an-hour wind. I felt the rush tear across my legs, even through the sealed turret. A toolbox near the back slammed into the wall. It sounded like gunfire. Someone screamed, not from pain, from fear. The intercom sputtered and popped. The pilot's voice came through, strained, breathless. "Structural fatigue. We're holding her as best we can." Fatigue. That word felt so small, so civilized, like we were dealing with a tired man, not a dying machine. But that was what this was. Our plane wasn't just tired. She was fractured. Fractured in ways that didn't show until it was nearly too late. Every bolt had been tightened. Every wire checked before takeoff, but none of it could stop time. This was mission number 18, and Louise was built to last 25 maybe on paper, but paper didn't fly. Metal did, and metal remembered every hit, every dive, every patch and scar. It all added up. I could smell the heat now. Hot oil, warm metal, the scent of friction. The B-17 was never meant to be luxurious, but this smell, this was new and dangerous. It meant parts were rubbing that shouldn't be, bearings grinding without grease, joints moving beyond design. In the nose, I could see the navigator clutching a pencil tight, not for writing, just to have something to hold. In moments like this, men need anchors. That pencil was his. And I had my guns. Even if no enemy was in sight, even if shooting wouldn't fix the skin pulling off our wings, it was about feeling in control of something, anything. The world outside the glass was so blue, so calm, a lie, the kind of peace that mocked the chaos inside. No flak, no fighters, just wind and sun and a horizon that didn't care whether we lived or died. Then the groan changed, deeper, more urgent, like something inside Louise had finally given up. A loud pop cracked from somewhere in the wing, followed by a rapid stutter of vibration, the kind of shiver that means a panel is lifting, or worse, a spar giving way. My hands gripped the turret frame. I stared up into the belly of the plane, and I realized something that still haunts me. That groan wasn't just metal. It wasn't just stress. It was a cry from a machine pushed beyond its limits, carrying 9 scared men who had nowhere else to go but down. If stories like this speak to you, share what it made you feel in the comments. These are not just tales of war. They are echoes of survival. And if this kind of memory deserves a place in history, subscribe and help us keep these voices from fading. There's more to remember than just who won. There's how we made it through. They called her the Flying Fortress, and that name was more than just propaganda. It was faith hammered into aluminum. The Boeing B-17 wasn't built to be elegant. She was built to survive. 4 engines, 4,000 horsepower combined. Over 10 tons of metal, loaded with bombs, bullets, and boys barely old enough to shave. On the ground, she looked massive. In the sky, she looked like a promise. That morning, that promise felt like it was coming undone. Louise, our ship, had been through 17 missions. 17 times we'd asked her to take us through flak storms, fighter runs, engine fires, and near misses so close they left paint scrapes on the fuselage. And every time, she brought us back, scarred, patched, limping maybe, but breathing. Until that day. By the time we passed over the enemy countryside, she had started talking in new ways, the kind of language you only learn by surviving in her belly. Deep clicks in the landing gear housing, a tremble in the floorboards, that eerie metallic moan that seemed to come from every direction and nowhere at once. The B-17 had no fancy insulation, no quiet cabin. Every sound lived with you. You could hear the wind slapping at the rivets. You could hear fuel rushing through the lines. You could hear the engines roaring so loud they became part of your blood pressure. That plane didn't whisper. She roared, cried, and growled. Each engine was a Wright R-1820 Cyclone radial, a beast of a motor with 9 cylinders arranged in a circle like a clenched fist. They were air-cooled, which meant less to fail under fire. But if you lost one, the rest had to drag her dead weight across the sky. That morning, number 2 was acting up. Not dead, but not happy. From my post, I watched the vibration ripple through the left wing every time that engine sputtered. It was subtle at first, but then the whole left side began to twitch. The skin of the wing flexed like a muscle under strain. I could see the bomb racks inside the bay shuddering with every gust. The floor near the radio compartment had buckled slightly, just an inch, but that inch meant more than most people understand. It meant the airframe was starting to twist under the pressure. And with over 5,000 rounds of ammo aboard, 2,000 pounds of bombs still locked in, and the entire crew fully geared, every pound was pushing her closer to the edge. Beneath us, the countryside passed in slow motion. Roads like tiny veins, fields and squares, streams that looked like cracks in the ground. It all felt so calm from up there, but inside Louise, it was anything but calm. We had names for every part of that plane, not official ones. The engineers at Boeing would laugh at our terminology, but it helped us stay sane. The waist was the hallway of hell, the tail was the coffin. The ball turret was the womb of nightmares. And the nose, that was the nerve center, where the plane could feel everything before we did. I remember glancing down at the gun mount beside me. Scratched metal, old dried blood from a past mission. Black tape holding a sighting cable in place. Nothing about that machine was perfect. But perfect wasn't what we needed. We needed it to keep flying. The bomb bay doors had jammed half open now. Wind howled through the gaps, and cold air blasted into the cabin like winter's breath. Our flight engineer tried to manually crank them shut, but the gears were slipping. Stripped teeth, no time to fix it. We kept going, the doors flapping slightly, each gust reminding us how fragile we really were. I checked my belt feed, still had enough rounds. But my hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion, from holding the same position too long, from gripping cold metal and hoping that it would keep holding me back. We didn't talk much during moments like these. Words got in the way. Instead, we passed looks. A nod, a raised eyebrow, a grimace. Language built between men who'd flown too many times together. You knew what someone was thinking just by how they blinked. Then came the shudder, not a vibration, a full body jolt, the kind that travels through your boots, into your spine, and makes your ears ring even with the engines roaring. Something structural had shifted, something important. I heard one of the crew in the rear yell that the tail felt loose, not wobbly, loose. The tail of a B-17 isn't just a rudder and a gun, it's the counterbalance. It holds the whole system stable. If the tail goes, everything goes. I tightened my harness. I looked down at my gloves covered in dirt and oil from the turret's last jam. My knees hurt, my neck was stiff, my ears were ringing, but I was still breathing. That counted for something. There was a moment, just a flash, where I thought about what would happen if she came apart, if one of the main spars snapped, if the wing folded in, if the fuselage split like a cracker. Would it be fast? Would we even feel it? Or would we just disappear into the cold? No one talked about those thoughts. But we all had them. We flew through sky the color of steel, with clouds like bruises and light that flickered through the damage in our aircraft. I think it was then that I truly understood what it meant to trust a machine, to sit inside something made by hands and hope those hands had done enough. And she kept flying, bent, cracked, breathing heavy, but flying, not because she was new, not because she was flawless, but because she refused to die. Machines don't have souls. That's what I used to believe. But if you had been in that plane, if you had heard those sounds, if you had seen the way she pulled herself forward through all of it, you might change your mind too. She was our shield, our prison, our only chance. And as long as she held together, so did we. If this story stirred something in you, take a second to leave a comment. Every reaction reminds us that these memories matter. And if you want to help preserve voices like this one, hit subscribe. What you're listening to is not fiction. It's memory turned into sound. He didn't scream. That's what I remember most. Not the sound of the impact, not the spray of red on the glass, not the way his body slumped forward in that tiny bubble of plexiglass. It was the silence, the unnatural stillness that followed the hit. Franklin had taken a fragment straight to the neck, maybe shrapnel, maybe a glancing round from one of those Focke-Wulfs that had been hounding us minutes before. We didn't know. We never found the source. 1 second he was calling out positions over the intercom. The next, nothing. I saw his head tilt, just slightly. His helmet shifted to the side. Then his left arm dropped away from the .50 caliber grips, and for a moment it looked like he was just leaning back, taking a breath. Resting, but no one rests mid-attack. The blood was slow at first, a deep crimson blooming across his collar. Then it came faster, soaking through his flight jacket, trailing down into the gun mount, dripping onto the floor below. I shouted his name over the intercom. "Franklin, do you copy?" Nothing. "Franklin, respond." Still nothing. The navigator turned, tried to see through the small side window into the top turret, but the angle was bad. The glare from the sun made it look like everything was fine, but we knew it wasn't. There's a sound you hear inside a bomber when someone dies. It's not a bang, not a thud. It's more like the plane itself exhaling, like something has left that space forever. The metal absorbs the silence. The hum of the engines no longer feels steady. It feels cruel. The captain didn't ask. He just switched frequencies and kept flying. There was nothing we could do. We were over enemy territory, 20 minutes from the drop zone, surrounded by flak bursts and shadows that could turn into fighters at any second. Franklin was gone, but the war didn't care. That was the truth we all swallowed on missions like that. There was no pause button, no chance to grieve, no moment of silence. The engines roared, the guns rattled, the wind kept slamming against the fuselage, and we kept going. Because if we didn't, we'd join him. There was a saying in the Air Corps, "Dead weight flies just the same." It sounds heartless, but it wasn't. It was survival logic, cold, efficient, necessary. You couldn't pull someone back from the turret mid-flight. You couldn't move a body across a narrow catwalk under fire. So you left them where they were. You left them in place, hands stiff on the grips, heads resting against cracked glass, and hoped they found peace in whatever came after. I remember watching the blood pool around the base of the turret. It wasn't quick. It gathered slowly, as if even death was hesitant to fully claim him. The red crept across the floor like it was trying to draw a map, back to a home he'd never see again. Franklin was 21, from Nebraska. He played the harmonica after chow. Not well, but loud. He used to hum during takeoff, always the same tune. Said it calmed him down. Said if he died in the air, he wanted music in his ears. He didn't get music. He got metal and wind and the echo of a crew too scared to speak his name. A few minutes later, I noticed the rookie, Daniels, just behind the bomb bay. He was staring at the floor, at Franklin's blood, which had reached the edge of the catwalk and begun to drip slowly down into the plane's belly. Daniels was pale, mouth open slightly, eyes wide like a deer pinned in headlights. He didn't look up when I called his name. I crawled over and placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched hard like I'd jolted him out of a dream. He blinked fast and wiped his eyes with a dirty glove. "He's dead," he said. I didn't reply. He said it again. "Franklin's dead." This time I nodded, just once, and then we both returned to our stations, because that was all we could do. The rest of the crew stayed quiet. No jokes, no chatter, no more of that forced laughter that usually crept in during tense missions. Just the hum of the Cyclone engines and the occasional click of ammo belts being checked. Silence in a B-17 is deafening. There's always something making noise. The rattling of glass, the flecks of aluminum, the endless growl of the propellers, but when no one is speaking, it amplifies everything else. The plane feels more alive when death is near. I kept watching the top turret, even with Franklin still inside it. The guns pointed steady. It was almost poetic. His body was gone, but the machine kept its posture, still scanning, still aimed, like he was guarding us even in death. The truth is, we had all made a deal with fate long before that mission, a silent contract. If one of us went down, the rest would keep flying. We didn't owe the dead our tears. We owed them completion, deliver the bombs, stay in formation, survive. Anything less dishonored them. There was a superstition among gunners that if you looked directly at a man after he was killed, his face would stay with you. You'd see it every time you closed your eyes, every time you heard a certain pitch in the wind. I tried not to look, but I did, and they were right. Franklin's eyes were half open, not surprised, not afraid, just still. And to this day, every time I hear a harmonica, I see him there, frozen in that turret, 21 years old, head tilted slightly, lips parted like he was about to hum one last tune. If you're still listening, let me ask you something. Did that image stick with you? If it did, leave a comment. Let us know what moved you. These stories don't survive on memory alone. They live because someone out there chooses to remember them. And if you believe that matters, subscribe to the channel. Not for numbers, for honor. By April of 1944, the numbers had become a kind of ritual. We all knew them. We just didn't speak them out loud. 729 B-17s lost that month over France alone. That's not a typo. That's not an exaggeration. 729 flying fortresses shot down, torn apart, or swallowed whole by the gray sky. Multiply that by 10 men per crew, and you begin to understand the scale. These weren't statistics. These were people. Each aircraft had a name painted on the nose. A girl back home. A hometown bar. A lucky phrase. Each name vanished with its own echo. You see, the ground crews could replace metal. Factories in Michigan and Seattle were rolling out bombers faster than the Luftwaffe could knock them down. but they couldn't replace us. Not that fast. Not with experience. Not with souls. I once heard a briefing officer say our replacement rate was just under 20% per completed mission cycle. He said it with a straight face, like he was reading off supply chain numbers. He wasn't wrong, but it felt like he was talking about socks, not sons. You had about a 1 in 5 chance of finishing your tour in those days. That meant you saw more new faces in the barracks than old ones. Bunks were reassigned without ceremony. Mess kits were boxed up and sent home. Sometimes they didn't even bother, depending on how much was left. I remember walking into the hangar one afternoon and seeing a mechanic cleaning out a cockpit with a mop. Blood had soaked into the seat cushions. They were just throwing them away, tossing them into a pile with other broken parts. The pilot's name was still stenciled on the dashboard. He had flown 13 missions, made it to the unlucky number. And yet, in the sky, we were still treated like statistics. Enemy flak didn't care if you were scared. It didn't care if you hadn't slept. It didn't care if you had written a letter home that morning. It didn't care if you were on your first flight or your 15th. It just exploded, indiscriminate and cold, in black clouds of steel that could shear a wing in half. And when we lost someone, there wasn't always time to mark it. Sometimes the only record of a crew was the hole they left in the formation. The mission log for our crew still had 10 names listed that day. Franklin's was one of them. Daniel's hand shook when he wrote it down, tracing the letters too slowly, as if trying to keep him alive just a moment longer. And yet we kept going. The logic was brutal, but effective. The war didn't need heroes. It needed fuel, bullets, and men who could be relied upon to climb into machines that were more coffin than aircraft, and do it again the next day. You learned to detach. Not because you didn't care, but because caring too much would drown you. We stopped asking about someone's family after a while. We didn't ask if they had a girl or what they wanted to do after the war. The fewer details, the lighter the loss. That was survival. But there were moments when the weight broke through. Like when we flew over a downed fortress, still burning in a distant field, and someone in the turret whispered a name. No one responded. We all heard it. We just pretended we didn't. Or the time we landed and saw 3 ambulances waiting instead of 1. The medics moved fast, but not like they were rushing, more like they were used to it. You started noticing the little things, the way a man folded his jacket in the morning, the way he looked at his boots. If he polished them carefully, he believed he was coming back. If he didn't, he had made peace with whatever was coming. And then there were the letters. We all had them, folded into pockets, tucked inside helmets, written with shaking hands on scrap paper during long waits on the tarmac. Letters to mothers, to wives, to brothers who had already been lost. We wrote them because we wanted something to outlive us, and we prayed they wouldn't need to be mailed. Sometimes they were. One of our gunners had written 4, one for each member of his family. Gave them to me the night before we flew this mission. Said he had a bad feeling. Said if anything happened, make sure they got delivered. He didn't make it through May. I still remember the address. Detroit, Oak Street. A white house with blue shutters. I never knocked on the door. I couldn't. I left the letters with the chaplain. It was all I could do. The mission logs recorded only the essentials. Plane number, crew names, bomb tonnage, coordinates, fuel used, hits confirmed. They didn't record the fear, the sweat, the way your hand trembled before the intercom clicked on, the way your chest ached when you realized the man beside you wasn't moving anymore. They didn't record how you'd wake up nights after, convinced you were still in the sky, still falling. They didn't tell you that when you came home you'd avoid fireworks for the rest of your life because they sounded too much like flak. But those things matter. They mattered then. They still matter now. So if this story sat heavy on your heart, share it. Leave a comment below. Tell us what made you stop and feel. These memories don't ask to be worshipped, only remembered. And if you believe that matters, consider subscribing. Because as long as someone is listening, we were never just statistics. We were stories, and stories endure. I saw him through the corner of my glass, a shape moving fast, low, cutting across the left wing at maybe 400 miles an hour. It was a German FW-190, no doubt about it. The nose markings were distinct, red trim, black cross, sleek, fast, and deadly. But what made my breath catch wasn't the aircraft. It was what he did. He didn't fire. He flew alongside us, just outside of gun range, close enough to see the dirt on his canopy, close enough that I could make out the silhouette of his helmet, his scarf fluttering behind his neck. For a few seconds, maybe less, we were no longer enemies. We were just two men sharing the same sky, separated by inches of metal and years of hatred. His plane was banged up. There were holes along the tail and soot smeared across the fuselage. His right wingtip was jagged, like he had brushed up against something violent on his way in. He was flying wounded. So were we. For a moment, we just watched each other. The guns on my turret were frozen, not jammed, just still. My fingers hovered over the triggers, not out of hesitation, but because something told me not to shoot. Not yet. The pilot looked at me, turned his head, visibly, deliberately. And though I couldn't see his eyes through the glass, I knew he was looking straight into mine. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't nod. He just stayed there, matching our speed, gliding like a shadow. And then, just as quickly as he came, he banked away and vanished into the clouds. We didn't talk about it until we landed. No one wanted to say what we saw. No one wanted to admit that the enemy had let us live. But we all felt it. There was no logic to it, no tactical gain, no strategy. He had us. We were crippled. We had one dead, two injured, a jammed turret, and a wounded engine. One solid burst, and he could have ended us. But he didn't. That moment stayed with me more than the dogfights, more than the kills, more than the medals, because in that sliver of time, I saw something the war never taught us to expect. Mercy. You don't get many clean memories in war. Most of them are stained with smoke and noise and panic, but that one was clear, sharp, almost serene. And I have no doubt he remembers it too. There is a kind of fatigue that sets in after too many missions. Not the kind that sleep can fix, the kind that settles behind your eyes, that wears out your thoughts. That day, I think he was tired. I think we both were. Maybe he had just watched a friend burn in the sky. Maybe he had been fighting since dawn and was running low on ammo. Maybe he saw the blood on our windows and decided we had already paid enough. Maybe he just wanted to go home. And maybe for one breathless second, we both saw the boy behind the uniform. People like to paint war in simple strokes, heroes and villains, good guys and monsters. But that's not how it works in the sky. Up there, you're just trying to live another 10 minutes. And sometimes the man trying to kill you is just as broken as you are. After that flight, I found myself thinking about the Germans differently. Not all of them. Not the SS, not the ones who wore death on their collars, but the pilots, the young ones in cockpits no bigger than closets, just like ours, fighting for reasons they didn't choose, surviving for people they'd never see again. Some of them were only teenagers, like Daniels, like Franklin. We later learned that many German squadrons were recycling the same airframes. They didn't have the production power we did. Some planes had been patched up a dozen times, engines swapped, wings reinforced with scrap. Pilots were being rotated in so fast they were flying with barely 20 hours of training. They were desperate. And desperate men aren't always cruel. Sometimes they're just tired of dying. There's a photograph I keep in my garage. It's not official, just a grainy snapshot someone took after we landed that day. You can see the damage on our ship, the missing turret, the scorched paneling. But if you look close, right near the wing, there's a thin white vapor trail cutting across the sky behind us, just one. I like to believe that was him, watching over us for a minute, then disappearing. You might say I'm imagining it. You might say it was coincidence. But I was there, and I know what I saw. He could have pulled the trigger, but he didn't. And sometimes that's the bravest thing a soldier can do. If this story made you pause even for a moment, let us know in the comments. Stories like these are reminders that humanity doesn't always die in war. It survives in the cracks. And if you believe in preserving memories like this, subscribe. Because long after the last plane lands, these moments still fly. I never heard that sound again. Not in the years that followed, not in the hum of commercial flights, or in the buzz of farm equipment back home, or even in the idle thrum of my own heartbeat at night. But I remember it with painful clarity. A deep, slow groan. A sound that didn't come from metal, but from something deeper, older, something alive. It was the sound of Louise, our B-17, pulling herself through the final miles of that mission, cracked, bleeding air, screaming through every bolt and joint that she was still alive, but barely. It wasn't just structural stress, it was a voice, a cry, a final breath holding itself together for the sake of the souls it carried. She should not have made it. She was wounded from wingtip to tail. The bomb bay doors were mangled. The top turret was slick with blood. Half the crew was injured or in shock. One was already gone. We were trailing black smoke like a funeral procession in the sky. But she didn't let go. That aircraft had no mind, no heart. But I'll swear to you, she refused to die until we were home. When we touched down, the wheels hit the tarmac harder than usual. The strut squealed. The frame shook like it was letting out the last bit of strength it had. Then the engines wound down one by one, and a silence settled that didn't feel like peace. It felt like mourning. I climbed out of that ball turret slower than usual, not from pain, from reverence. My boots touched the ground, and for the first time in hours, I remembered what gravity really felt like. Turner sat down on the runway, his shoulder bandaged, eyes hollow. Daniels threw up behind a fuel truck. The rest of us stood around Louise, staring at her like you would a wounded animal that had just limped back from a war it should not have survived. The mechanics came quickly, clipboard in hand, eyes wide. They walked the length of the fuselage, counting holes, shaking their heads, whistling under their breath. One of them said they'd never seen a plane come back in that shape. She never flew again. They scrapped her for parts 2 weeks later. We were assigned a new ship, brand new, shiny. Not a scratch on her. But she never felt like home, because Louise had been ours. She had bled with us. She had carried our fear, our sweat, our laughter, our silence. She had held the dying and delivered the living. When I walked away from her that day, I carried more than gear. I carried ghosts. I carried the sound of aluminum under strain, the cry of engines swallowing pain, the weight of silence that only war knows how to keep. And to this day, I still carry it. Even now, when I'm alone in the garage and the wind rattles the gutters just right, I close my eyes and hear her again. That low moan, that voice of metal and memory, and suddenly I'm 23 again, strapped into a glass turret, flying over a land I never wanted to see. Sometimes people ask what it was like, and I tell them the truth. The scariest part wasn't the flak. It wasn't the fighters. It wasn't even watching someone die. It was hearing that sound. Because when I heard that groan deep in her bones, I knew she was doing more than flying. She was choosing to hold us together for just a little longer. That sound stays with you. Long after the medals tarnish, long after the uniforms no longer fit, long after the newspapers forget which mission it was or who flew it, that sound is still there. Because it wasn't just the plane that cracked, it was me. To everyone who listened, thank you. Not just for your time, but for your willingness to feel what we felt. These stories are more than history. They are echoes of sacrifice, of humanity, of survival. If something here moved you, leave a comment and let us know what stayed with you. Every word brings these voices back to life. And if you believe stories like this still matter, subscribe to the channel. Keep the memory flying. Keep it human. Now, go ahead. Click on the next video. There's another story waiting. Another name that deserves to be remembered. Another sky that was never supposed to be silent.